Sheriff's Department. Hey there.
Hi.
I am here to effect the eviction
Okay.
of this property. So I need you to open the door and get whatever it is you need to get.
Right, I understand that, but I've never been through this before, but I'm trying to go through the legal procedures for the house for the illegal foreclosure.
Right. Unfortunately for right now, I had to kick everybody out of the house and turn the property over to the real estate agent. Okay? I mean, you basically have, 15, 20 minutes at the most.
Oh my God.
It's just another day for Deputy Art Gonzalez from the Sacramento Sheriff's Department. Today he's evicting Pat Patterson from the house she's lived in for 6 years.
They just ran the clock for 6 months until it got so far, and then they gave us the foreclosure notice.
Don't forget your legal paperwork. Take that with you.
Every week, Deputy Gonzalez evicts dozens, sometimes hundreds of people from their homes.
If you got a foreclosure, it was a very rare thing. And now it's almost like the opposite, Foreclosures there's so many of them now that it's become the norm. I mean, I can't take sides. I gotta remain neutral, because my main job is to effect the court order.
We're coming out. I'm coming out.
This scene is repeated every day across the U.S. as the country continues to grapple with a housing crisis that is spun out of control.
I think you learn to block it, because I think I would be a basket case, I think, if I let it get to me. So, you learn to just put it in the back of your mind somewhere, lock it away,
Owning a home has long been the centerpiece of the American dream. But since the foreclosure crisis and the subsequent near collapse of the American economy, that dream has turned sour. More than 4 million people have lost their homes. Millions more are at risk. And nationwide, nearly 1 in 3 borrowers owes more on their mortgages than their homes are worth. However, not everyone sees the crisis as an unmitigated disaster.
Okay, this right here is a foreclosure. This is another one right over here.
Peter Westbrook is a real estate investor in Stockton, California, which tops the nation in foreclosures.
The first house that I bought here, this was a pre-foreclosure. I think everybody thought in California it wasn't going to end, that the prices were just going to continue to rise and rise and rise. The bottom dropped out and everybody bailed. And so it left a huge wave of vacant houses.
Trustee cell number 2011011103.
Peter brought us to Stockton's daily auction of foreclosed homes.
Any bid you make is irrevocable and cannot be withdrawn. Your bid must be higher than the open bid and won't be canceled by a hard bid. We'll sell the property to the last and highest bidder.
While the economy in the city has all but collapsed, business here at least is brisk.
So this is the only outlet for a bank to sell a house that's foreclosed.
These people looking for foreclosure bargains are called vulture investors.
226 on behalf of Amy.
We are often portrayed as the bad people.
231, right? 231 on behalf of Rich.
Like we just basically come in and make all the money from people who are in bad situation.
236 and 500 on behalf of James.
But the fact is, if we don't buy the property, then the bank take the property back.
244 500 on behalf of Amy.
Everybody needs to take responsibility. I pay my mortgage and I pay where I have to live. So everybody else has too.
I didn't create that homeowner's inability to make their payment. I didn't create any of the issues that they have.
Probably so. Amy for 252.
Personal responsibility is a big thing. That's what creates opportunity.
If you ask, people who've been foreclosed upon, whose fault is it, they often kind of say it's mine. It's my fault. I did the wrong things. And instead of kind of saying this is a systemic problem.
Social theorist David Harvey traces the roots of the current crisis back to the 30s and 40s, when expanding the American economy became centrally linked to the real estate market.
Capital is always producing surpluses. At the end of the day, if you have a profit, you've got a surplus. And the big question is, what do you do with it? What you do is you take part of that surplus and you reinvest it in something.
From every section of the country come reports of vastly increased building activity.
And in the United States, housing and urbanization in general has been a vast field for the expansion of profitable opportunities.
This tidal wave of new construction is an important contribution to the economic rebuilding of America.
For decades, the housing market has been viewed as an engine of growth.
Home ownership is the basis of a happy, contented family life.
The federal government incentivized home ownership.
His wife is entranced by the modern flat-top stove.
Through tax deductions and institutions like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac.
Too bad they can't afford it. Ah, but maybe they can.
This worked as long as incomes rose. But since the 1970s, real wages for most Americans have remained stagnant.
The clients for those houses started to run out, and so you then find a conflict between the fact that wages have not been rising, but housing consumption has to keep on rising. So this mismatch then became absolutely crucial.
But bankers and federal regulators found a way out. They loosened the terms of credit and began to allow people with very low incomes to get mortgages. The subprime industry was born, and Wall Street used complex betting instruments to profit off these risky mortgages.
So you start to go more and more down into a population that cannot really afford it, and that, of course, is a population that got foreclosed upon.
We started to plot foreclosures in our neighborhood.
A group of community leaders in Chicago explained how this unfolded in their minority neighborhood.
Systemic issue it was. And this is a map that shows you foreclosures initiated over the last 2 years.
Every single block has foreclosures.
Yes, correct.
It was a contagion. I mean,
Correct.
How could it be so uniform? Is there some connection? Like, what was it one particularly predatory lending?
Yeah. Likewise, in California, large sections of the population who had long been left out of the dream of home ownership were aggressively targeted for subprime mortgages. They were rarely warned that the rates could get much higher in a short period of time. California is one of the epicenters of the foreclosure crisis in the U.S. Of the 10 worst-hit cities in the nation, 7 of them are in this state. We're at the state capitol to find out from legislators what they're trying to do to keep people in their homes.
Let me just give you an idea of what the problem is. In California, up to 500,000 people have their homes either in foreclosure or about to be foreclosed upon, such that they will lose their home.
California State Assemblyman Mike Eng co-sponsored the Homeowner Bill of Rights that was signed into law in July. He says the first wave of foreclosures can be traced back to the predatory lending industry.
They would market loans, particularly in low-income communities. People of color, Latinos in California, are twice as likely to be foreclosed upon than, say, their Anglo-American counterparts.
Not all the subprime mortgages were taken out by first-time home buyers. Many were for equity loans secured against existing homes. In other words, refinancing.
What did the outside of the house used to look like?
I had it all stuccoed, yeah, and I had these archways put in. I just gave it a little bit more, class, or what you want to say, individual look.
As the housing bubble grew, homes became a crucial source of wealth, and in an era of low savings, a lifeline for people like 86-year-old Eileen Rivera.
So that's why I said,
But when that bubble burst and unemployment rose, keeping up with mortgage payments, whether prime or subprime, became impossible for more and more people. That's what happened to Eileen. And 2 years ago, a real estate agent showed up at her door to say her home had been sold at auction.
I never heard anything like this in my life. So I said, what are you talking about? This is my home of 45 years, and I'm going nowhere. This is my home.
Could you ever imagine that being taken away from you?
Never. They take it away in a moment.
Esa refinanciada que dimos fue cuando que el interés bajó porque nosotros le dimos al 6.
Margarita Ramirez was a homeowner who thought she was doing everything right. Her expenses were rising, and everyone recommended refinancing. After all, home values were soaring.
Sobre el equity, y agarra uno dinero porque tiene equity.
But when her payments ballooned, she realized the dangers of a subprime loan and refinanced again. This time, she qualified for a prime loan with a fixed rate. But last year, Margarita lost her home. The trouble began soon after the recession hit. Her husband was laid off, and they applied for a loan modification from Bank of America.
Estos son todos los documentos que estuvimos recibiendo del Banco de América durante el proceso de la modificación, papeles y más papeles.
Just nothing less than inches and inches and inches worth of documents.
Margarita spoke to bank representatives in Spanish, but she was also getting written notifications of foreclosure in English, a language she doesn't understand.
Yo le llamaba al banco para atrás para decirle qué significaba esa carta, que estaba en inglés, yo no la entendía. Y ellos me decían, oh, no te preocupes, esa carta no le hagas caso, no tiene que ver nada. Tu modificación está en proceso, todo está funcionando bien.
After months of negotiations, her home was sold without her knowledge.
Compró nuestra casa.
A homeowner may be negotiating the terms of their mortgage, perhaps a lower amount over a longer period of time, and yet a person possibly in the next room is literally preparing the papers to foreclose on the home. That's called the dual track.
So, and the thing about that is that if they had modified her loan,
Margarita is now renting back the house from the new owners. But she believes her home was illegally foreclosed upon. She's now become an active member of a community organization in Oakland called Causa Justa, Just Cause, that helps residents facing foreclosure.
California is a non-judicial foreclosure state, so they can sell our home at auction without ever going before a judge.
After a sustained campaign by Just Cause, Bank of America admits some mistakes were made in Margarita's case. But there's another obstacle: the government-owned Fannie Mae.
Absolutely. See, this is one of the things that's confusing about the whole system. They sell the loan to an investor, and then the bank that we got the loan from becomes the servicer. And so it's the investors who actually have the power to say whether a foreclosure happens.
Today, over half of all mortgages in America are owned or guaranteed by the taxpayer-supported Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac.
Tengo entendido que Freddie Mac tomó posesión de mi propiedad.
Same with me, Freddie Mac. And so in the case of Margarita, it was Freddie Mac or Fannie Mae?
Fannie Mae.
Fannie Mae.
Fannie Mae owned Margarita's mortgage and sold her home, but it refuses to consider that the foreclosure was illegal. California's new law isn't going to help Margarita either.
The problem we have is that 60% of the housing market in California is owned by what we call Freddie and Fannie, and they are not subject to any California solutions. And so that's why
60% of your housing market's really in the federal government's hands,
absolutely,
not your hands.
That's correct.
If you have missed
the Obama administration says it wants to keep people in their homes, but the government bailed out the banks at the expense of struggling homeowners.
So we've seen a devastating transfer of wealth from black and brown communities to the 1%.
The government gave a great deal of money to the banks and said, I hope you will lend, but the banks didn't. It turned to the banks and said, will you please renegotiate the mortgages? And the banks kind of said, well, we may do a few of them. But the banks have not really played ball with this at all. They make huge profits and get huge bonuses, but they bear none of the risk because the government socializes the risk.
Here in Chicago, protesters angry at the lack of affordable housing are taking advantage of President Obama's visit for the NATO summit to get their message across.
We're taking over!
Millions of Americans are emerging from the foreclosure crisis without a place to call home.
Brothers and sisters, this building is called the HUD building.
For over 4 decades, the federal government funded affordable housing for low-income families. But since the 1980s, funding for new housing has been slashed, and nearly 250,000 public housing units have been demolished. We met housing organizer J.R. Fleming at the protest. He took us to his old home in Cabrini Green.
So Cabrini Green, you see the amenity, bang!
It used to be the city's most notorious housing development.
And it's all set for demolition.
Yep.
Why?
Look at that, skyline. You think poor people have a right to this view?
Most of Cabrini's buildings have already been demolished, displacing thousands of residents.
Many Americans are facing foreclosures, and they need a safety net right now. And that safety net does not exist anymore. It used to be public housing. So right now, where we're standing is where I used to live at. This is the last high-rise I lived in, 862 North Cedric. It is actually the place where I got married at. Now to stand here and see nothing, a vacant lot.
A decade ago, the city launched its ambitious Plan for Transformation, tearing down most of its public housing.
We say that the plan for transformation is the plan for devastation. But we come to find out that this was an economically motivated plan, and that this plan had nothing to do with the people, that this plan was based on the profitability of this land.
In their place, mixed income developments have emerged, where only 1/3 of the units are reserved for public housing tenants.
They use the terminology affordable housing, but what common American can afford almost $2,000, $3,000 a month for rent? Not us.
At Lathrop Homes, one of the city's oldest housing projects, we met Noreen Castanon and Mildred Pagon, two of the few residents left clinging to their homes.
A lot of these apartments, they're livable. It's just they don't want nobody that, it's just like everything's on hold right now.
The people living here were offered vouchers to move out and rent in the private market. Most took up the offer. But Noreen and Mildred, who have been here for most of their lives, refused.
I'm gonna leave when the bulldozers come. That's what I always tell everybody. They'd be like, you're still there? I'd be like, yep, I'm gonna be the last of the Mohicans. I'm gonna still be here.
The few who remain at Lathrop face an uncertain future.
What would happen to you if they did away with this community of public housing?
Probably we gotta stay with other members of family, or we're gonna have to go homeless because we don't have a job. And there's a lot of people that doesn't have a job over here, and they need housing.
What do you think about the idea of turning this into a mixed income area?
I really wouldn't want it like that. I
Why?
really would. Because I hear other stories of other places, you know, and I feel like it should just be housing for the people that need it, because there is a lot of homeless people in Chicago. And, you know, to me, you could take the family, the mothers and kids that are in shelters. I mean, you could open up these apartments and help them, you know.
Vacant properties are spreading like wildfire through Chicago's poor neighborhoods. The city plans to tear some of them down to reduce blight. But the Chicago anti-eviction campaign and the Take Back the Land movement have been trying to identify and clean up some of these homes and make them livable again.
I'm trying to get a team out here tonight to look at the plumbing. We know we need 2 kitchen sets.
Today, they're targeting this foreclosed house in Chicago's South Side.
That's still good. This is why I hate evictions. People just being forced to take what they could, you know, and not what they should.
This family was evicted. They left so fast that they didn't even take all these letters with them and all these pictures that were left behind. Really remnants of a life.
And so you have all of these empty houses in the midst of a large population that has real need for decent housing. And you cannot put the two together because the income stream they have is not sufficient to satisfy the banks on the housing. It's at moments like this when the irrationality of the whole capitalist system becomes, perfectly obvious. So you then start to say, well, maybe we have to really think about a completely different system.
Everyone should have a roof over their head. And so when we take over foreclosed and abandoned property, we're saying we're recreating public housing.
We got in touch with a family that was evicted from here.
They love the, big backyard. We don't have.
Kenya Perkins and her 3 children agreed to meet us the next day back at their old home.
I miss my own room. Yeah, I miss my own too. It's basically the same, really. It's just, I wish I could have stayed.
Kenya had been renting the property, but was locked out when the building was foreclosed upon.
Feels like home.
What was the hardest part of it?
Figuring out where I was going to go, where my kids was going to sleep the next day. So it was a bit much.
Yeah.
I'm just grateful God put me through it.
Why is that?
Everything happened all at the same time. They lost their grandmother, and we lost the apartment. So it was like a rough time in our life for that to, come down on us as well, a bit much.
Kenya's story isn't unusual. Nationwide, 40% of families facing eviction due to foreclosures are renters. The anti-eviction campaign hopes to make Kenya's old home available to a homeless family.
The banks have taken away so much from people that it's about time that the people take something from the bank.
Moving families into bank-owned foreclosed homes is a creative response to the crisis, but it could put the activists on a collision course with the law.
It was illegal for blacks and whites to eat together, to dine together, to sit together, to walk together, to talk together. But it was something that was morally right. So people tell us it's illegal for us to occupy our homes. It's illegal for us to take back the land. They're right, it is illegal, but it's morally right.
The housing bubble that burst nearly 6 years ago triggered, as we all know, the worst economic crisis of our lifetimes.
President Obama may have inherited this economic crisis that America still finds itself in.
Hi, baby.
Sheriff's Department.
My administration unveiled a series of steps to help responsible homeowners.
But after almost 4 years in power, nothing his administration has done has been able to stem the tide of foreclosures.
Okay, nobody here. Just the furniture.
We need to keep doing everything we can to help homeowners and our economy. No compensation, no amount of money, no measure of justice is enough to make it right for a family who's had their piece of the American dream wrongly taken from them.
Did we bail out the banks or did we bail out the people? We bailed out the banks, and now the people are paying the cost. If we had bailed out the people, there would have been no foreclosure crisis and the banks would have been okay.
Only 1 in 4 homeowners who applied for government-sponsored loan modifications got help, and less than 10% of the $50 billion Obama promised them has been spent.
So where's all that hope for change?
Oh, we got change, chump change. I would tell you we got change. And if hope is just that hope. Hope don't pay the bills. Hope don't give you housing.
For too many in America, the economic recovery isn't even on the horizon.
You work and you save your entire life to buy a home. That's where you raise your family. That's where your kids' memories are formed. That's your stake, your claim on the American dream.
People always talking about the American dream. It's not even a reality anymore, Dreams are something that you can aspire to hope to have. And you can't have that dream of a house in America right now.